some questions, but really, hopefully leave some time for you all to ask some questions too. I'm Gwen Pugh. I'm Associate Dean for Strategic Initiatives in the College of Arts and Sciences. And
I'm Tanisha Jackson, Assistant Professor in the Department of African American Studies and an Executive Director of this house, Community Folk Arts Center. And this is really interesting because usually I am welcoming the house for someone else to perform on this stage. But yes, happy to be here and to talk about this book.
The first question. Toni Morrison is often quoted as saying, if you don't see the book that you want to read, you should write the book that you want to read or that you don't see. Some version of that quote.
Yes.
So I thought I'd start with why? Why this book? Why now? What made you write this book about Black women in art and racism?
Well, first of all, Toni Morrison is one of my biggest inspirations. I've been reading her work since middle school, and that's because of my mother. And initially, I thought I was going to be the next Toni Morrison. So I'm glad that you opened with that question. But to answer that question, I'd love to just read my preface, because it really explains not just this book, but who I am and why I do the work that I do, in addition to writing Black women's art ecosystems. And so I write, in narrating the story of Black women artists as wellness workers, I think it is also essential to share my personal journey and how art has been integral to my life, as well as a source of healing for me. My earliest memory of creating art dates back to when I was 5. At the time, I was an only child living with my mother. My parents had recently divorced. And I sat in my new surroundings, a pound puppy themed bedroom. These toys created by Tonka in the 1980s were a line of plush stuffed dog dolls that captured my imagination and sparked my creative spirit. On my 5th birthday, I received my first pound puppy, which inspired me to replicate their images through drawing. The early experience marked the beginning of my identity as a creative individual. At some point, while I was sitting in my room, the thought came to me to try to draw a pound puppy. I remember first studying the image of the dog on my comforter. I noticed every dog was a collection of geometric shapes and connected to develop a complete picture. At the time, I didn't know that what I was discovering was composition and form. That would come many years later in a high school art class. Yet this awareness prompted me to try to replicate the images on my bed comforter through drawing. And I picked up a pencil, and on a piece of white paper, I began drawing a single shape, the dog's ear, and then connecting the other shapes that made up its eyes and nose. I drew the image very carefully to ensure its form was proportional and correct in scale. And soon I completed the picture of a pound puppy. I was excited. I had excellent hand-eye coordination for a 5-year-old and recognized that I had natural talent. I remember thinking, I can draw. My mother came to my room to check on me at some point, and I proudly showed her my drawing. She was amazed at my picture's quality and affirmed me by saying, "Nisha, you're an artist." My mother's praise and affirmation confirmed what I already knew about myself, and it was from this point that I would hold on to the identity of a creative artist while navigating life. As I grew older, societal expectations shaped my expectations, or excuse me, I'm nervous, I'm sorry, my perceptions of success and career goals. Despite my natural talent for art, I pursued a path toward becoming a medical doctor. At it last. Despite my natural talent for art, I pursued a path toward becoming a medical doctor influenced by the notion that careers in engineering, law, medicine were more prestigious and lucrative. However, my passion for the humanities led me to major in English, where I discovered a love for literature and writing. My undergraduate years were enriched by courses in Black studies, which fueled my interest in the African diaspora and my appreciation for Black culture. My journey took a significant turn when I enrolled in the Master of Arts program in the Department of African American and African Studies at The Ohio State University. This is the part, right? This decision marked a departure from my initial career aspirations and ignited my passion for research and teaching. However, during my first quarter of graduate school, I faced a debilitating illness. This illness brought immense physical challenges, but I persevered, determined to complete my studies despite the pain and fatigue. Art became a crucial part of my healing process. During my recovery from surgery, I rediscovered my love for painting. Using art supplies I had stored away, I began creating figurative images of Black people, scenes of Black women in meditation, and still life compositions. This meditative practice of painting helped me regain the strength and confidence, affirming my identity as an artist. After completing my graduate program, I embarked on a path that combined my interest in arts, Black studies, and community engagement. My doctoral studies in arts education allowed me to merge these passions, focusing on the representation of Black women in art and visual culture. This journey led me to my current role as a professor in Black studies at Syracuse University and the executive director of the university's Community Folk Arts Center, where I explore the transformative power of arts within the context of wellness. My dual engagement with academia and community-based arts has provided a dynamic platform for studying the impact of art on individual and collective well-being. The Community Folk Arts Center, with its emphasis on African diaspora arts, is a living laboratory for understanding how the creative practices of Black women artists contribute to community wellness. Through my research, I aim to amplify the voices of contemporary Black women artists, examining how their work fosters resilience and empowerment, healing within their communities. So I'll stop there and say that my own personal story, right? That 5-year-old little girl. I honestly believe that who we are then, those are formative years, is really at the essence of who we are as adults. And so, and that person never left who I was. So in my pursuit to be a medical doctor, a lawyer, and everything else, the arts and the humanities was still there.
And I love how you rediscovered that when, like, there's another connection to wellness. When you were ill, like, you renewed your love of art and creating again through making it through, you know, being ill and rediscovering that about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I ran away from the arts, and I think that, you know, I grew up in a time when you watched Cosby, you watched the Huxtables, you had these narratives about what success looked like, and then also conversations about, you know, not just money, but then also, you know, economic empowerment, where artists in general, regardless of what community you come from, is not associated with that.
And Black art was so foregrounded on the Cosby. I remember growing up watching the Cosbys, and like my first piece of art that I purchased was this picture that used to be on Living Singles in their living room, the one with the man and the woman, and I was just like, because I like wanted to be the living single women, and like like buying that and having that in my apartment. That picture was just like, okay, I've arrived. I'm like Janelle, because I have that got to see so much Black art, like through those TV shows, and yeah.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I really like about your book is that you intentionally bring forward to the forefront the idea of labor in art, right? You talk about these Black women artists as wellness workers. You talk about art ecosystems, like how things work, right? How they work together, like work and labor, to me, seems very foregrounded in your appreciation of the arts. So what happens when we foreground the work that art is doing, or the work that the artist is doing? Like, what makes you want to like focus on the work of it all? Because, you know, some people like to think about artists as like, oh, that's just creative.
Art for art's sake.
For art's sake, but you know, for us,
Yes.
Black arts movement, art for people's sake, has always been like, not just like,
Yes.
like, right?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think art is political, and Black people do make art for art's sake, and at the same time, the art is still political,
Right.
because it's created by Black people, and so in many ways, we can't get around it. Oftentimes, art has been the vehicle for political movements. Art has been used to document and continues to be used to document our lived experiences. So that artist, the Black artist, is the historian and is the cultural laborers of our communities. And it's an important role to have. And so if we think about the historical trajectory of Black artists, particularly you know, within a U.S. context, because if we're thinking of diasporically, we're thinking on the continent of Africa, well, you know, we kicked this off, you know, really in many ways, where art, and looking at art from a utilitarian perspective, where art has a functionality, there's that piece, but if we're looking at within a U.S. perspective, where, you know, depending on if you are a laborer, if you are enslaved, and you don't have the luxury of creating art, but you find cultural expressions, you know, despite those, you know, those circumstances, that creative expression never left. And it's in those moments that I acknowledge those creators, you know, as artists. People still creating art despite insurmountable odds.
And so, like, I want you to riff on that a little bit more, because I was also thinking about, like, you know, where Audre Lorde talks about being a poet and, like, the economy of poetry. Like, you can write a poem at your kitchen table without having, you know, needing a lot of resources. So, and, you know, Alice Walker talking about In Search of Our Mother's Garden, like, these women didn't have a lot, so they made art in their gardens, and, like, all of the ways in which I think that the women you write about are kind of the dream of these women who had to be so economical and kind of eke out the art wherever they can find it. But it's still not like, oh, you know, this, I have the luxury of art, but it's definitely, talk about that history of like where we are now and how that connection is kind of a dream realized, I think.
So yeah, so now you have, you know, professional Black women artists and all of the artists in this book.
Who can make a living sometimes with art where
they are making a living.
Right.
Yeah, these are professional contemporary Black women artists who do this full time. One of them is exhibiting in the gallery. Amber Robles Gordon. That is all that she does. And so, but they stand on the shoulders of Black women artists who and who from, you know, didn't necessarily have that luxury. And still there are artists who don't. It depends on if you are an emerging artist. There are artists who work full-time jobs and they are in their studio at night. Still today, not every artist has the luxury to do their work full-time. One of the things that I want to draw, though, attention to...
They have the luxury of being known as an artist, too, I think, in ways where I think the women that Alice Walker writes about, we have to go back and claim them as artists, right? That
Yes.
we have to claim those gardens as art. Whereas now, at least you can say, I'm an artist, right?
Yes.
So I think that's kind of, I don't know, what you think?
Well, yeah, I think that, but no, we're gonna claim these artists, we're gonna make these women artists. I think that, that these women, that these artists exist, yes. And that reclamation is important because it is there that they are cultivating spaces of creativity in our community, and that at a very, grassroots level, they are cultural laborers, right, that are helping to formulate new ways of understanding our experiences. And if we talk about the role of women in society, right, and how in this transmittal of like information, and how they leave like this archive of information through their art, that is important. Absolutely. There's an artist in the book, Vanessa German, who is very much she is a full-time professional artist. She has, I would say, made it, right?
Right.
The materials that she uses is so interesting because, in her story, and she's not a formally trained artist, and she's an amazing, her story to me is so amazing because she, I believe, has, she's just gifted, but the materials that she used, found objects in her community, right, is instructive of how you can create anything, right? By how she was, she's able to also point to the things in the community and to create, material of what, that's perceived as junk, especially coming out of the Homewood community, if you know anything about Pittsburgh. And that was just, now things have evolved, with some of her materials and things, since then, right? But so I talk about her story and how she brings in the community and youth and exposes crime at the time when she was in Homewood as a way of talking about that, but then also the resourcefulness of being an artist and embracing and involving the community. And so it leads back to wellness work and how these artists in this book are creating art first and foremost as a means of facilitating wellness for themselves, but also within their respective communities. Because if you know her story, you know that she was creating art to first save herself. Save herself from suicide, save herself from, a lot of other personal challenges. And from there, save the community that was going through violence, a lot of crime, and things, and then also gentrification and other things. And so, and then that gets, then there's a broader wellness that's taking place because then there's a narrative at that time about Black Lives Matter and say her name. And so when I say wellness, in this book, I am acknowledging that these women artists, and in the time that we live, and also historically, and I hope we get a chance to talk about that, are seeing opportunities at a very grassroots level to really facilitate dialogue and conversations that I see a connection, that I see that is wellness, that is self-care, so that these disparate fields, art and wellness, that we don't necessarily always connect together, gets connected through the vehicle of art. And that's an important conversation to have because in many, there are many times when conventional forms of healthcare, conventional forms of mental health care fail communities. May not always be culturally conducive for a community, may not always be accessible for certain communities. And when they have not always been accessible for communities, somehow we've survived. So the question becomes, how have we survived? What are some of the, organic, conventional ways that we have taken care of ourselves? And I see that in art, in the arts.
And so you bring up history. I think one of the things that you do in this book is really tell a history of Black women in art. So where we at, like to introduce that early 1971 collective to us, right? What does it mean to like add that? And then I think like the interviews and like what you're doing with the other artists is a part of like adding to the history of these, like so telling that story, putting that history into the world.
Yes. Well, first of all, I got blessed with Dinga McCannon writing forward of this book. And if you don't know who Dinga McCannon is, she is Black arts movement like royalty. Like she is one of the co-founders of Where We At, which is Black Women Artists, and it is one of the first documented Black Women Artists Collective, which was formed during the Black Arts Movement. And the reason why that is important because this was a group of women, and it involved Faith Ringo, if any of you know who she is, right? Just to tell you, the caliber of artists and women that we're speaking of in their early years, coming together at a time when Black women artists didn't have a place in the Black arts movement because of patriarchy, because that was big.
Oh,
right. And I know you're
with
white.
All the blacks are men, but
right?
Some of us are brave, right?
Some of us are brave, right? White women artists weren't necessarily embracing Black women artists, or the issues weren't connecting to the experiences of Black women. And so you have this collective coming together, and they model, after the Panthers, really, they have like these lists of demands.
What we want, what we believe.
Right? And but not only that, but they are supporting each other, and they have an exhibition, and I talk about that in the book. But what I found interesting in the archive, and in talking to Dinga and in the archive that I was researching, is that they were demonstrating collective care in the community. They were in prisons, they were in community art spaces, they were in colleges, they were teaching young youth in arts and things like that, and they were concerned about Black women artists having child care, having access to education, and then also having representation in museums and galleries. And so, and it's an interesting time because it's at the same time that CFAC, the Community Folk Arts Center, was established. So I want everyone to know that the very space that you're sitting in is an example of the type of work that was taking place. This is not like a distant past, but this is an example of, this is a space that's still standing, right? This is a 21st century arts center that still has relevance and still doing the same work at that time. And so this is just one of many, groups. This is an important group, but then also I connected to different spaces too. So to focus on that and on the work at hand, that's important. So
yeah. Well, that's good. Like the history of it was part of that question, but like you're getting into the other part, which is the importance of these ecosystems. Like what goes into an art ecosystem as you're describing it in your book, and why it's important to document what that ecosystem is and why we need to support that ecosystem, all of the parts of it. So.
Absolutely. So when I say Black women art ecosystems, one of the things, and maybe this goes back to my studies of pre-med. Maybe it was the biology class. I was like, there's a connection here. Ecosystems from a biological, study, there are 6 characteristics of an ecosystem. There's like, and so there's like this interconnectedness, there's this cyclical nature, there is, so biodiversity. And what I saw was that there was a parallel metaphorically of an ecosystem and then also how Black women artists operate within their own ecosystems. And then there's also, there's an art ecosystem in general. So for example, there are artists, there are curators, there are galleries, there are museums, there are collectors, right? There are arts administrators. All of that is an ecosystem. Then if you go even further at a micro level, Black women artists are operating within that, within their own spaces. There are galleries and boutiques that they run. There are Black women artist collectives. There are curators within those spaces and places. And then that, so at a micro level, doing the cultural work outside of the mainstream ecosystem. And so I highlight Black women art ecosystems as a means to show, you know, what they're doing and how it's connected and grounded in wellness work. Yeah.
Speaking of wellness, let's talk about the weight of wellness now. There's a quote that I know everybody has heard a million times, but it's one of my favorite quotes from Toni Cade Bambara's Salt Eaters, where she says, "Are you sure, sweetheart, that you want to be well? Just so you're sure, sweetheart, and ready to be healed, because wholeness is no trifling matter. A lot of weight when you are well." So, in your book, you're talking about these wellness workers and the work that these artists are doing, like for themselves. But like, what does it mean to carry that weight of wellness? Like, how, in your interviews with the artists, did any of that kind of like we talk a little bit about the labor, but like the emotional weight of wellness that
Right.
comes through with the art. You have sections where you're talking about like grief through the art, the movements, Black Lives Matter, Say Her Name, like so much. Like the weight of wellness seems to loom a little heavy. So like, but
Yeah, absolutely. So, and thank you for that question because it reminded me of the categories of wellness that I addressed, so that within the book, there's a movement that talks about, I would say, like collective empowerment and wellness. So that there's the collective wellness, that when we dig deeper into like individual wellness, there are stories about how Black women really work through issues of like motherhood, issues of, the superwoman complex, right? And taking on the burdens and the weight of doing it all. There is spiritual wellness, and from there, how that is manifested and interpreted, and then but then also generational wellness and trauma. And this is not doom and gloom, right? But it's a way in which
but it's heavy, but it's
right.
Yeah, and it's
right.
Yeah.
It's heavy, but at the same time, the art allows for that heaviness to be worked through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is what I can appreciate about, I get my work, if I could do a little navel gazing.
Go ahead, girl. This is about you.
Because there's a lot of work that talks about trauma. There's a lot of work that talks about our trauma. But what I think that this book does is shows us how we get over it,
Mm-hmm.
right? I don't think that we talk enough about how we're able to navigate it. I don't think we talk enough about it.
Yeah.
And I think talking about the trauma is important, talking about this, you know, we have to talk about it.
Yeah.
We have to talk about the systemic racism, we have to talk about Charleston. And she has a memorial art that has these tambourines that have black lambskin coverings. And they have the names of the victims inscribed in the lambskin. And there's all sorts of symbolisms about lambskin, if you think about Christ and things like that. And then also, some of the tambourines are blank because those names are yet to be inscribed, which is an indication that, right? Okay, so that being said, and that's in a national museum. So that is an example of a national memorial and her providing a space for a national mourning. So I'm giving you an example of one, Lava Thomas's story. She talks about how she was personally impacted, then how she worked through that in her art, then how she offered that to the community. Now it's in a space where we all can come and grieve and reflect and think about something that was so hurtful to multiple communities. So as examples of how, that was, I think, 2016, I gotta get my dates right, I don't, I have the dates, but it's in the book. But think about how we may nationally mourn because of what's happening in Minneapolis. And how artists can speak to the time now, and yet are. That's what artists have the power to do. That's why the artists, and this extends beyond Black women artists, that's why artists, period, are so important to society. That's why the griot is so important. Vanessa Johnson, who's in the book, right? Because they tell our stories. They help us to understand and recognize at the essence our humanity, who we are, and draw us back in when we move away from that. So, sorry, I got digress.
So I want to give, before I let us open it up to see if other people, I'm going to give 2 more questions that'll be our little teaser questions to get people all like, ooh, let me get in line to get my copy of the book. So my first question, for you to give a little bit of a teaser, is more, out of all the artists that you mentioned in your book, if you had to pick one piece by one of those artists. Then this is the only piece of art you can have with you for the rest of your life that you get to have, but this is yours. What piece would it be and why?
She told me her piece. I'm like, I don't know about that one. I don't know if I can.
You don't know if you can do that.
I don't know if I can do that, and I don't want to
So
go on record
of doing
doing
that.
Some of these artists are now my friends.
So what we'll do to make people want to buy the book then is just say that there's so much amazing art that you'll see images of in this book that you definitely want to have this piece because it can also.
Absolutely. I will say this, that some of these women artists have exhibited at CFAC. We have been blessed to have Shaniqua Gay. She was here, I think, 3 years ago now. And so Pam, you was here for that. She had painted our whole wall blue. This blue mural, which was gorgeous. She's an Atlanta-based artist. And she had in this book a powerful installation. She has these figures called the Devout. And it's a powerful chapter. I will that's a section that I really love writing about, I'll say. And how she talks about these mythic figures that protect a community both in the temporal world, real world, and the spiritual world. And so really interesting. Tony Chapman, who's on the cover of this book, does beautiful, this is actually photography, that she paints and she jewels, gold relief and jewel on paint.
The cover is gorgeous, I just have to tell you.
Thank you, it's great marketing. I was like, thank you, University of Illinois Press, I appreciate it. But this is actually cropped. And so we have images going, behind us, where you'll see the full image. And these are young girls with their arms outstretched. But if you look very closely, there's a center figure, and she's got gold tears, and her head is kind of low. But the rest of the girls with their heads and their arms are holding her up. So if you look at that image, it really shows the support of that sisterhood, right? And so that's an image that speaks to me. Lavette Ballard's work, Lavette has amazing work, and she was here, she came in 2021, and so a lot of people didn't get to see her in person because of the pandemic, but then we put it online. Beautiful woodwork, like wood fences that she collages and paints on, and it's just stunning to see. And I actually have collected some of her work, so that gives you any indication. I'm a fan of Lavette's for sure. And she is her documentation of both her family stories, but then also history and how she uses the archive is something that is really interesting. It's really fun to see because you can identify a lot of historical images and figures, but then also, the interior, right, of everyday life is there. And yeah, I'll stop, because I can talk about these artists and images all day, so.
Save some for people that want to buy the book. And then I guess the last thing I'll say for me is, one of the things that I noticed, I'll share a story, like when I was writing my first academic book, it wasn't until I wrote the last chapter, it wasn't the last chapter of the book, but it was the last chapter that I actually wrote where I felt like I finally found my own voice. And I was like, oh girl, this is you. So is there a part of this book where you feel like, this is the chapter that resonates the most for me? Can you give us a snippet of just, I know you read a little bit, and what part of this book do you think, when you wrote that, you said, because that's when I was like, girl, you wrote that chapter. What? What part of this book made you think, okay,
the whole book.
I see you too.
The whole book.
Give us a snippet then.
I'm going to tell you, I read the whole book and I was like, man, I wrote that.
Well,
I kid you. Don't let the red lip fool you. I'm very humble. I know. The first paragraph I wrote, I think, man, this is gonna take a long time. I'm like, this is, when you write a book, it just seems like it's gonna take forever. And then you get into a flow, right? You get into a flow, and then I just fell in love with the project. And so, I didn't pull out a passage. I think that I always gravitate when I present. There's certain, let me see, because I don't want to move in. So I don't know if I can pull out a passage. I just think that when I look at the book and I just pull out different sections, I think about the time where I was at when I was writing it. And I think about where I was working the piece. And I think something that I do very well is just make connections. It is I can look at a piece, I can look at something visually, and I can just make connections and conceptually see how something is connected, metaphors and things like that, and intertextuality, and layer it, and then say, okay, this is saying this is saying that, and so I've done that. I'm an English major, but to do that as for a book, a whole body of work, and I guess in some ways a dissertation, but for a book, to see all of that, that's when I say, okay,
you did that.
I did that. So I did that. So I'll say.
So basically, you saying that the art is all, you just don't have to buy the book and see.
Yeah.
And then the prose, you just gonna have to buy it. So basically, right?
I do want to. There's a couple things I do want to. I want to share, and like where are we with time? It's 7:26. So there's a couple things that I want to bring out, because as much as this book is, I started with my story, but this book is also about this community. And I don't think that you all know that in the last chapter of this book, I write about the Community Folk Arts Center, and I write about different organizations that we partner with and what we did during the pandemic. And I want to acknowledge those organizations, and because we continue to work together. So I'd like to acknowledge 100 Black Men. So I guess I'll read something like that. So I said, the organization safely engaged the Syracuse community by hosting a Black Lives Matter paint party for adults and children at Kirk Park in collaboration with 100 Black Men Syracuse. While 100 Black Men of Syracuse provided masks, hand sanitizer, voter registration information, and snacks, the Community Folk Arts Center displayed Wings' Resist COVID-19 Take 6, that's Carrie Mae Wings, merchandise, and managed the paint party. Participants sat safely distanced apart and painted on canvases that were created by Danielle Levinston, a Black woman artist and art educator based in Chicago. And so from there, I talk about how, where am I at? Let's see. The collaboration yielded a great turnout and demonstrated that community-based organizations could foster dialogue and promote wellness through the visual arts. So during the pandemic, Community Folk Arts Center and 100 Black Men went to Kirk Park, set up tables, set up easels and paint, hand sanitizer, voter registration cards, masks, buttons, and we were on the news, right? But it was a way to create community, get out, information about voting, get out information about COVID-19, how to stay safe, and then also the painting of the canvas had some imagery about Black Lives Matter and then also COVID-19. And so it was like an image with fists and like a mask. We're doing a lot. That being said, that's an example of partnership, especially during such a tumultuous time. That's an example. So I want to pull that out. The next community partner that I think is important, and then I know, so I want to, it's important for me to acknowledge, is the Syracuse, New York chapter of the Links Incorporated. Were y'all here? Yes. So we've been working together for a long time. The Competitive Teen Arts Show. This is this chapter and the Community Folk Arts Center were established in the same year, 1972. Yes. And so I hope so, because that's in the book. Okay, so is this our 55th year? I think so. And so of the Competitive Teen Arts Show, so where we come together and we host a art show, and we have high school students submit artwork, and they get prizes, ribbons. They also have a college fund scholarship that they give out. So for going on 55 years, these two organizations have partnered, and we do this in like May. And so that's a plug because we want y'all to come and support. That being said, with a reception, so you always get fed at CFAC, that's the other thing. But I write, the Competitive Teen Art Show was established at CFAC in partnership with the Syracuse, New York chapter of the Links Incorporated, an international nonprofit corporation consisting of, at the time, 17,000 professional women of color in 299 chapters in 41 states. The number has increased. But that being said, what I talk about is we did not want to break that continuity because of COVID. And so, not on my watch, I didn't want that reputation. and we were trying to think about, what can we do? We can't meet like we regularly can. And this is important to the organizations, and this is important to the community. And so, Community Folk Arts Center, we created a online gallery. And through our, we have like a nonprofit, and I think I kind of made Syracuse University a little nervous because we kind of went rogue, but that's a whole other thing. I heard through the grapevine, they were like, what is she doing? But that's okay. But we had a online gallery, and the show didn't stop. And so I analyzed a piece of artwork. This is an important piece because it's the only piece of art that's not by a Black woman. So I talk about how the organization still held the show. And we had an online exhibition, and we had teachers and students go online. But there's a particular piece of artwork by a young white girl at the time. She's a young woman now, Caitlin Seiko. And she has this piece, you'll probably see it, but it's the one where there's a Black image and it's white eyes. And it won Best in Show. And she talks about, she's impacted by Black Lives Matter. And she's impacted by the conversations taking place, in the schools and things like that, right? And so, that being said, this show, this particular platform being an opportunity for her to have that conversation and dialogue, and for art, right, for her to navigate what she's going through, and to talk about the white gaze when it comes to Black bodies. And so I thought that was powerful to draw out and to say that this is the work that, the Syracuse, New York, Links, chapter of the Links Incorporated and the Community Folk Arts Center does. So I want to say that. And then the other thing, person I want to, or in partner I want to acknowledge is Vanessa Johnson. So right with him. So Vanessa and I, we work together. We worked on many projects, and so Vanessa's personal story is in this chapter. She's had a retrospective exhibition here at CFAC, which has been amazing. She has taught many of the children in this community, not just at CFAC, but in many different schools. And it's during this time when I'm writing this book that she worked with a group called Shades of Inspiration, which is a nonprofit organization that was founded to help support women of color who have breast cancer, who are sometimes in remission, sometimes not. And they created these narrative dolls. And this came at a time when I lost my grandmother to breast cancer. So to come full circle, while she is working with these women and giving them a space and an outlet to create, I again am healed, right? So yes, and so Vanessa tells her story as to why she became an artist, or why she is an artist, I should say. How that individual journey has led to community engagement, to her being a griot, those sorts of things, and then also this particular community project through the Community Folk Arts Center. So I just want to give examples about when I say wellness, when I use, self-care, when I'm talking about ecosystems. It is multifaceted. It is not space specific. Sometimes it is anywhere that these artists are and their artwork pops up. It is anywhere that they do the work. It can be site specific. It can be a demonstration in the streets. It could be in a white gallery or museum where they do their thing. It's the energy and the work and the labor that these Black women artists are creating and pushing out into the world. And I'm proud to say that we have an example of that here in Syracuse at the Community Folk Arts Center.
But I do want to, before we go into the book signing and the wonderful treats I'm sure you have out there, if we have an audience member or two that would like to engage our author in a question.
Hi. I'm currently one of the only Black students, Black females, that is writing my thesis on Black girlhood, and I just wanted to ask you what one of your most transformative experiences as a professor was with a student of color.
Oh my gosh.
She don't like to just pick one thing.
My most transformative.
Well, you don't have to pick. I plan on buying your book and like.
I just gotta think about it. I've been teaching for a long time, so.
Well, that's okay.
Okay, so let me process what you're asking. So, gotta figure out what that is. So I think that, so for me, it's been, and it's happened a couple times. It's been when the students have come to me and have, shared with me, beyond the academics, what it has meant to work with me because of the representation. So that oftentimes when Black women professors, there's an extra level of labor, and I'm gonna look to you. There's an added level of labor that's there, the mentorship that's there, and because of the lack of representation, and so it means that much more. And when I've been made aware of it, it makes it, all that I do, what I've studied, and that much more worth it. That's not to say that I'm teaching solely, just for Black students, but that my presence is important. How I show up is important. How we show up is important. And then it reminds me that someone showed up for me. And I've had several of those moments. Yeah, thank you for that question. I see a hand back there. Yes.
Congratulations, Dr. Jackson. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you.
I am really excited to purchase your book, and one of the things that I'm really interested in is your experience learning more about your archival experience. So as an emerging historian, oftentimes when we're in the archives, we say that the archives speak to us, right? So were there any particular moments or collections or sources that really like drew you in that you write about in your book?
Yeah, so and this is where I was like, okay, I'm a real nerd. Like, I got so excited when I found catalogs of art directories that gave me more information about the work of the Where We At Black Women Artists Collective. I'm like, oh wow.
I would have geeked out about that too.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It was just in this little bit, it was just like a paragraph that gave me what I needed, what I intuitively knew that, what they were doing, that, Dinga said they were doing this, right? But I was like, oh wow, so newspaper.com is one of my favorite sources. But then also digging through the archives in that way, those little nuggets is something that I found very valuable, and I can just lose myself in the archive. It is something that really helps me to contextualize, especially when I'm interviewing people. So I would say that, and then also finding old photos, and so that's another source. And so, but yes, I would say that, and then also because I delve in, I draw historical methods. I'm not a historian, right? But I mean, there's mixed methods in my work. But I really enjoy talking to my friends and colleagues who are historians and learning how they were trained. And they're very disciplined. Historians are very systematized in ways that I don't think I'm an artist, right? But I respected it, and it made me tighter with my research. So I respect when you do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions?
Oh,
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your book. It's wonderful. You talk about eco-womanism in it, and I wanted to see how you would describe its symbiotic relationship to environmental activism.
So, yes. So a couple things. If I were to add a chapter to the book, it would include more of that. There are artists that I didn't pay attention to who actually speak to that. And that would have been a nice pairing with, ecosystems. Environmental activism, there are, and I'm blanking on her name, but there's an artist in Michigan that, that's a shame that she's in my article. That's going to come out. But with environmental activism, there are a lot of artists that are drawing attention, using art to draw attention to environmental activism. And so I touched on it a little bit, but there's a lot to be said about it. And so, especially like in Flint, in fact, that's where the artist is from, and so it'll come to me afterwards. But so in answering your question, sometimes it's not just drawing attention to the environmental activism, but it's also the strategic use of materials in the art that is intentional to have that conversation about environmental activism. So when I think about the parallels
you get the artists that uses recycled
materials and things like that. So that is equally as important. And I'm thinking about like water, landfill, things like that. And so that's a whole thing within the art world. So hopefully I'm answering your question, but yes. Thank you, I appreciate it.
So we do want to have time for folks to purchase the book and get the book signed. But I think we're good.